The first lamp went out with a soft, metallic click, and Privet Drive, so proud of its neat curtains and measured hedges and polished brass knockers, lost at once the appearance of safety. Darkness did not belong in such a street. It made the trimmed lawns look watchful. It made the flower beds seem like the shallow graves of smaller, meaner things. It made the silence ring. Albus Dumbledore moved along the pavement without hurry, though every old bone in him ached with the fatigue of a night that had broken half the world and spared the other half only by chance. He was very tall beneath the drifting mist, and age sat upon him in folds of silver hair and beard, in the carefulness with which he turned his head, in the weary wisdom of his hands. Those hands had held wands over battlefields. They had buried children. They had shaken with rage only once in 50 years, and he had spent all the years since trying to make that one failure answerable to no further dead. At the corner sat a tabby cat with dark rings around her eyes as if she had not slept for a week. "You may come out, Minerva," he said quietly. The cat leapt down from the wall and became Professor McGonagall in a rush of tartan and severity. Her face, though composed as ever, had been worked raw by worry. "The rumors are all true, then?" "I am afraid so." "He is gone?" Dumbledore's gaze moved to the dark house with the number 4 upon its door. "Gone is not the word I would choose." McGonagall followed his look and set her mouth hard. "And this," she said, in a voice that struck the neat street like a crack in glass, "this is where you intend to leave him. For a time. These people will never understand him." "No," said Dumbledore, and that single word carried more sorrow than excuse. She had watched the celebrations in secret all day. Owls by noon, fireworks by dusk, witches embracing strangers in the marketplace, wizards drinking themselves sentimental beneath church clocks they had spent a century pretending not to notice. She had watched Vernon Dursley too, blustering through his respectable life with a face like a boiled ham and a heart more offended than frightened by the mention of anything abnormal. "They are the worst sort of muggles," she said. "The kind who would rather bruise truth into something ordinary than admit they have seen it. I pass the day observing them. The boy, if he grows here." "He will live," said Dumbledore. She stared at him. "Is that all we aim for now?" His eyes, bright and terribly old behind his half-moon spectacles, lifted to hers. "Tonight, yes." The words struck her silent, not because they satisfied her, but because she heard what lay under them. Albus had not spoken that way, with such stripped simplicity, since the days when news came by owl from the continent, and every envelope seemed to weigh a human life. The wind moved through the privet hedges. Somewhere far away, a door shut. "He should be raised among our own," McGonagall said after a moment, softer now. "Among people who will tell him what his parents were, who will speak their names without bitterness." "Lily's blood must shelter him," Dumbledore said. "So long as her sister gives him house room, that protection may be extended. There are magic older than statutes, older than ministries. Voldemort struck at a bond he did not understand, and it destroyed him. If there is any safety to be made of that horror, it lies here." McGonagall flinched, not at the name but at the weary certainty in his voice. "And when safety ends?" Dumbledore did not answer at once. He had heard the prophecy in a dim room above a public house, and the memory of it had grown more poisonous with every death that followed. He had watched James Potter laugh at danger because youth is often brave and precisely the places wisdom would bar. He had watched Lily Potter look at her son with that fierce and terrible love that makes history kneel. He had watched the future narrow to a child in a ruined nursery, and a mark cut into flesh by murder interrupted. The prophecy did not command. It did not oblige. Prophecies were dangerous exactly because frightened people believed they must obey them, but certain truths lay beneath them like iron under snow. Voldemort had marked Harry. Voldemort had chosen him. One day, if fortune was cruel, and Dumbledore feared fortune often was, the dark would come for the boy again. "When safety ends," he said at last, "I would prefer he not greet it empty-handed." McGonagall searched his face then, and perhaps because she had known him long, perhaps because she was too tired to let herself be comforted by half-truths, she understood. Albus. He did not deny it. There came, distantly at first and then all at once, the beat and cough of a motorbike descending through the clouds. The machine emerged over the rooftops like a relic from a stranger century, all iron and noise and possible defiance. Rubeus Hagrid sat astride it, enormous shoulders hunched against the wind, black coat flapping like a torn sail. In his arms, bundled in a blanket too small to dignify the task, was a child. When Hagrid's boots hit the pavement, the great man's eyes were already red. "Professor," he said hoarsely, "I got him out all right. House were near blown to bits. Little fellow was right there, bold as brass. Didn't make a sound." McGonagall's face changed. Whatever arguments she had been ready to make broke apart like frost. She stepped nearer without quite daring to touch. Hagrid lowered the bundle into Dumbledore's waiting arms with a reverence that made the act seem liturgical. Harry Potter was warm. That was Dumbledore's first clear thought, absurd and immediate beneath all the grander considerations. The child was warm with sleep and milk and life. One small fist had worked itself free of the blanket and rested by his cheek. His eyelashes were dark crescents against skin still round with babyhood. The scar upon his brow was red and crude and new, not yet the emblem songs would make of it, only the raw result of something monstrous breaking where it should have killed. Dumbledore looked at the mark and felt, for a fleeting, sickening instant, an echo like a note played on a shattered string. There was power there. Not merely damage, not merely surviving curse scarring. Something had happened in that room at Godric's Hollow which no textbook would explain and no ministry inquiry would admit. The child had been touched by death, and not taken. The child had stood, as much as an infant can be said to stand, at the crossroads of two ancient magics, and come through marked by both. Harry stirred. His fist opened. Tiny fingers closed on the air. Dumbledore very nearly turned away from the house and carried him somewhere else. He might perhaps have justified it to himself. He might have called it mercy, or prudence, or the old right of the victorious to decide where the survivors sleep. But another kind of victory had always disgusted him most, the victory that steals a life in order to save it. He carried the child to the doorstep. The letter lay upon the blanket, sealed. It did not contain enough. No letter could. It explained parents and blood and reasons, but it could not confess guilt. It could not say, "I placed your father in danger before I could protect him. I knew more than I told your mother. I am leaving you here because the world I lead is still not safe enough to deserve you." It could not say, "Forgive me if later I ask more." He set Harry down gently in the basket, adjusted the blanket against the cold, and touched 2 fingers to the edge of the boy's hood. At once, the magic moved. It did not flare. Old magic seldom did. It went instead through the night like deep water through roots and foundation stones. The blood bond answered his wand, and Lily's sacrifice answered both. Number 4 Privet Drive shivered with unseen wards. The threshold thickened. The windows changed their relation to moonlight. The house, vulgar and ordinary as it was, became for a moment the most protected place in Britain. "There," Dumbledore murmured. Hagrid turned away and blew his nose like a trumpet. McGonagall stood very still, her face shining in the gloom. "Can I take him somewhere proper?" Hagrid whispered. "Just till morning like. Poor little thing." "No," said Dumbledore, and hated the sound of it. He straightened and looked down once more. The child slept on, ignorant as only the newly orphaned can be ignorant, within a circle of grief, prophecy, and borrowed peace. "Good luck, Harry," he said, because blessings were all that remained to men who had done too much. Then he turned away before the door opened, before Petunia Dursley's outrage met destiny on her own front step, before the street became ordinary again under the relit lamps. He did not sleep that night. In his office, while dawn came colorless through the high windows and the castle woke around him in the first thin noises of morning and relief, Dumbledore unlocked a cabinet he had not opened since the end of another war. Inside were books and dispatch boxes and folded maps marked with routes no longer used by any living regiment. There were treatises on counter-curses written after the Goblin rebellions, French manuals on shield work from dueling schools, long extinguished, old aura notes from the first years of Grindelwald's rise, and several documents in Dumbledore's own hand that he had once intended never to read again. He set them on the desk one by one. From another drawer he drew Arabella Figg's address and wrote in a narrow, slanting script, "Watch him. Tell me everything unusual. Especially the unusual that looks like survival." When the owl left, he sat with his fingers steepled before his mouth and stared at the gray morning until the light made all the silver instruments on his shelves gleam like a small and bitter sun. He had won too many wars to believe victory ended them. Some merely changed the size of the soldiers. Harry's first education had nothing to do with magic. It began in the dark under the stairs, where the smell of old paint and shoe polish taught him that grown people often put what they did not want to see into small places and called it tidiness. It continued at the breakfast table, where he learned the exact weight of silence required to avoid Uncle Vernon's eye, and the exact angle of his shoulders that made Aunt Petunia less likely to notice a hem too short or a bruise too fresh. It sharpened in the garden and the schoolyard and the uneven kingdom of little Winging's pavements, where Dudley Dursley and his friends moved through the world like a weather system, and Harry learned to read trouble, the way sailors read the sky. He became very good at reading it. By 5 he could tell, from the rhythm of Vernon's step in the hall, whether the evening would end in mere shouting or in doors slammed hard enough to shake dust from the cupboard walls. By 6 he knew how to flatten himself behind a hedge and wait out Dudley's pack. By 7 he had discovered that adults lied most convincingly when they were lying to themselves, and that Petunia's tight little mouth grew tightest whenever anything about him hinted at his mother. Magic leaked through such a childhood in frightened little acts. Once, when Dudley and Piers cornered him behind the school kitchens, Harry was somehow on the roof, cold and winded and no wiser than before as to how he had got there. Once Petunia cut his hair so brutally that his ears looked naked, and it had grown back overnight. Once a revolting hand-me-down jumper shrank itself rather than sit on him another day. Once, at the zoo, the glass vanished, and Dudley went plunging toward a snake that looked at Harry as though it had been waiting for a better species of company all morning. Arabella Figg noticed. So did her cats, though it was difficult to say how. She was a poor vessel for secrets, smelling of cabbage and mothballs and old carpets, but she was loyal in the slow, stubborn way of the overlooked. Harry spent many reluctant afternoons in her house when the Dursleys had somewhere they wished to go without him. He hated her stale cake and her stories about breeding measles she did not possess, but now and then, when he thought she was not looking, she watched him with a shrewdness unlike any other adult's. Once, when he flinched at the sound of a dropped pan next door, and was ashamed of it before the flinch had even finished moving through him, she only said in a tone made careless by effort, "You listen too hard, dear. Means you'll hear things others miss." That night an owl left her house for Hogwarts. Dumbledore read every report. He did not visit. He told himself that protection mattered more than pity, that interference would weaken the careful spellwork bound to Petunia's blood, that to walk into that house and look too closely upon what the boy suffered there would tempt him into ruining the one shield he trusted against Voldemort's return. These things were all true. None of them absolved him. Once, in Harry's 9th year, Dumbledore stood unseen across the street as summer darkened the windows of Privet Drive. Harry was in the flower bed, weeding because Vernon had decided idleness made boys soft. He was thin, in all the places children should not be thin. His glasses were mended with tape. He did not sing to himself or sulk or kick the earth. He simply worked, quick and silent, with the concentration of someone who had learned that obedience bought peace more cheaply than argument. Dumbledore went away with such violence in his chest that the next person who tried to congratulate him on defeating Grindelwald nearly found himself transfigured into a turnip. Then came the letters. No matter what else the Dursleys had crushed or denied, they could not make Harry uninvited to Hogwarts. The first owl arrived at breakfast on a Tuesday, and shattered the life of number 4 with one cream envelope. Vernon snatched it before Harry could touch it, purpled with a rage so panicked it was almost comic. Harry, who had spent all his life expecting nothing addressed to him except school notices and trouble, stared. More letters followed. They came under the door, through the milk slot, down the chimney, in such numbers that the air of the house seemed built from beating wings and parchment dust. Vernon nailed up gaps, burned envelopes, shouted at the post, packed the family into the car, and fled. Harry said very little during the flight from hotel to hotel and then from station platform to lonely coast, but in his silence something was changing. Adults had always defined the size of his world. Now something was battering at its walls hard enough to frighten Vernon Dursley. On the rock in the sea, as the storm shook the hut and Dudley whimpered in his sleep, Harry lay awake and listened. Rain struck the boards like thrown pebbles. The air smelled of salt and damp wool. Uncle Vernon's shotgun leaned by the door like a useless promise. At midnight came a pounding not from weather but from a fist large enough to sound like weather pretending it manners. The door went down inward. Rubeus Hagrid filled the frame, rain dripping from his beard, eyes fierce and bright. Firelight from the ruined hearth caught the wild black fall of his hair and made him look, to Harry's startled mind, like something stepped out of legend rather than entered by it. "Couldn't make us a cup o' tea, could ye?" he said, as though breaking into seaside huts were an ordinary prelude to hospitality. The next hour rearranged the world. Harry learned that his parents had not died in a car crash. He learned they had been James and Lily Potter, wizard and witch, and that their names were spoken with something close to reverence in a society hidden just beyond the edges of the one he knew. He learned that the lightning on his forehead was not merely odd but infamous. He learned the name Voldemort in pieces and recoil, as if Hagrid were dragging it over thorns to bring it into the room. Most bewildering of all, he learned that someone had expected him, had written to him, had kept a place for him in a castle he had never seen. "What's Hogwarts like?" Harry asked, almost before he meant to. It was the first question that belonged wholly to himself. Hagrid's face softened. "Home," he said, and because it came out before he could pretty it up, Harry believed him. Diagon Alley dazzled and embarrassed him in equal measure. Wizards nudged one another when he passed. Witches covered their mouths and stared. The goblins of Gringotts looked at him as if they already knew how history was balanced, and thought the arithmetic unflattering. Harry's vault shone with gold enough to make his head swim. Hagrid quietly removed a grubby little parcel from another vault, and though he said it was Hogwarts business, Harry noticed how carefully he tucked it away. At Ollivander's, among towers of dusty boxes and a silence that smelled of varnish and old wood, the wand chose him. Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. When the wand touched his hand, the air seemed to tighten. Warmth ran up his arm in a clean, bright rush, and the dim shop stirred. A strip of sunlight leapt across the floorboards. Somewhere above them, boxes rattled softly like teeth. Mr. Ollivander's pale eyes fixed on Harry's scar. "Curious," he murmured. "Very curious indeed." Harry did not yet know enough to dread the phrase. That evening, after Hagrid had bought him Hedwig and a stack of schoolbooks heavy enough to feel respectable, Harry sat for a moment on a low wall outside the leaky cauldron with his cage by his knee and his wand in his hand. People passed. Magic pressed at the seams of things. His life had not become easier. If anything, it had become enormous. Yet for the first time, the hugeness did not seem built entirely of threat. From an upper window across the lane, behind rain-blurred glass, an old man in midnight blue robes watched the boy turn the wand between his fingers and smiled with sorrowful relief. The owl from Ollivander had already arrived. The core, Dumbledore thought, had confirmed what destiny had whispered. Brother to the wand that had scarred him. Brother to the catastrophe. Brother, perhaps to whatever ending still waited. He folded the letter away and began, with slow care, to write another. It was addressed not to Harry Potter. Not yet. It was a note to himself, and its ink bit deep into the parchment. When the boy comes to school, begin with stance. then choice, then fear. King's Cross Station was all iron arches, steam, impatient whistles, and the ordinary rush of Muggle travel, which made the existence of Platform 9 3/4 feel less like a secret passage and more like an insult to common sense. Harry came to it by faith, because there was nothing else to do. He had tried alone, failed alone, and then heard a woman's voice saying, packed with Muggles, of course, in the fondly exasperated tone of someone who had conducted this miracle 100 times. Molly Weasley, bustling and kind and gloriously unconcerned by the strangeness of anything, shepherded him through the barrier as easily as if opening a garden gate. Harry found himself on the platform among scarlet steam and owls and cats and trunks and families saying goodbye with the complicated affection only large families seem able to perform in public without embarrassment. He met Ron before the train had properly settled into its motion. There was no ceremony to it. Ron simply asked if he might sit, looking half hopeful and half convinced the answer would be no. And Harry, who had rarely been asked anything by another child with such straightforward politeness, said yes. By the time the trolley witch had come and gone and Ron had attempted, with dismal failure, to turn his rat yellow, Harry knew that Ron had 6 older brothers, hated corned beef, wanted more than anything to matter in a family already crowded with achievements, and possessed the sort of humor that treated shame as a thing best kicked until it laughed. Hermione arrived in a blast of authority and checked Neville's compartments with such purposeful energy that she seemed less a new student than a prefect accidentally de-aged. Draco Malfoy came later, all pale disdain and polished assumptions. The offer of friendship he made to Harry was not in fact an offer at all, only an invitation to stand in the correct place in the world and sneer downward with him. Harry, remembering Hagrid's rough loyalty and the pinch in Draco's mouth when he had spoken of the wrong sort, refused him before he had the sophistication to know the refusal might one day be costly. The castle rose out of the lake like a dream too grand for mercy. Torches burned in hundreds of windows. The boats cut black water into rippling gold. Hagrid's voice boomed over the heads of the first years, but Harry only half heard him. There are moments in life when the soul moves ahead of the body and waits, breathless, at the threshold. Harry had the uncanny sensation that some part of him had come here years earlier and simply been waiting for the rest. The great hall nearly overwhelmed him. The ceiling held weather like a captive sky. Candles floated in their thousands. Long tables glittered with faces, silver, goblets, the nervous movement of hands. At the far end, professors sat beneath house banners and watched the new students with expressions ranging from kindly interest to profound boredom. Harry's scar prickled when Severus Snape looked at him. The sensation was sharp enough to make him blink. Snape's black eyes lingered a fraction too long, not with the delighted curiosity Harry had received in Diagon Alley, but with something harsher and more private. It was a look that felt older than the moment. On the center stool, beneath the patched and ancient sorting hat, Harry heard a voice in his ear where no mouth had spoken. "Difficult," said the hat. "Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. And a certain taste for risk. You could be great, you know. Not Slytherin," Harry thought at once, the memory of Draco's white face and Hagrid's contemptive mutter sharp in him. "Oh," said the hat, with what might almost have been amusement. "Are you sure? There's loyalty in you, yes, and a hunger to prove yourself, and a curiously disciplined edge for one so young. Not Slytherin. Very well then. Better be Gryffindor." The table exploded around him. The Weasley twins shouted as if victory had personally chosen them. Percy Weasley pumped Harry's hand with prefectural solemnity. Ron, sorted a few moments later, fell into the seat beside him looking equal parts delighted and doomed. Hermione went to Gryffindor too, which seemed just to the point of inevitability. Neville joined them pale and relieved. Draco, when his turn came, scarcely touched the stool before the hat cried Slytherin and the silver-green table erupted. From the staff dais, Dumbledore applauded like a man genuinely pleased by children. Harry kept glancing at him through the feast. The headmaster did not return the look, not even once. Yet Harry had a strange, unreasonable impression of being known. It was not an unpleasant feeling. It was simply unfamiliar. The first weeks passed in a blaze of stares that changed direction, portraits that commented on your posture, homework that bit, and professors who seemed built out of the subjects they taught. McGonagall was as strict as winter sunlight and twice as clear. Flitwick's cheerfulness made levitation feel almost possible. Snape's dungeon classes smelled of crushed roots, bitterness, and danger. He singled Harry out from the first moment, and though Harry could not understand why, he became aware with every lesson that Snape's contempt was not lazy or general. It had a target and memory. Harry tried not to care. He cared enormously. Flying changed the proportions of his world again. Madame Hooch's whistle cut the field. Brooms leapt. Neville rose and fell disastrously. A remembrall flashed in the autumn light. Draco seized it with a grin too pleased by another boy's pain, and Harry went up after him almost before the decision had formed. The broom felt natural under him in the way certain truths feel natural when one has been ignorant of them too long. Air made sense. Speed made sense. The red glass sphere tumbled, and Harry dove, hand closing around it just before the ground rushed up to break him. He landed to the open-mouthed silence of children and the furious admiration of a professor. By evening he was Gryffindor's new seeker. Ron stared at him as though accidental greatness had finally chosen the correct compartment. Hermione scolded him for breathtaking recklessness while looking faintly impressed against her will. Even Neville seemed to regard Harry with new awe. Harry, though proud, felt something stranger beneath the pride. Flying had not felt reckless from inside it. It had felt like listening to a part of himself he had never had permission to hear. The note arrived 2 nights later. It was delivered not by owl but by a small brass bird Harry had never seen before. The bird fluttered from the darkness above the common room fireplace, landed on the arm of his chair, and dropped a folded slip into his lap before turning into an ordinary paperweight and rolling under the table. Harry looked around quickly. No one appeared to have noticed. "Mr. Potter," the note read in a familiar, narrow hand. "If you would be so kind, join me in my office on Wednesday after supper. Use the stone gargoyle and say lemon drop. AD?" He read it 3 times. "Something wrong?" Ron asked through a mouthful of toasted cheese. Harry folded the paper too fast. "No, just homework." Hermione looked up sharply at that, suspicious on principle whenever homework was invoked without visible suffering. But she returned to her essay after a moment. Harry sat very still with the folded note in his pocket and the fire warm on his knees. Wednesday felt impossibly far away. When it came, he climbed the moving staircase to the gargoyle with a stomach full of nerves and the distinct feeling that he was walking not to a scolding, not to praise, but toward a door that had perhaps been standing open for him longer than he knew. The gargoyle leapt aside at Lemon Drop with a grin Harry found unexpectedly disconcerting. The staircase behind it carried him upward in a slow spiral. By the time he reached the office door, his palms were damp. Enter. Dumbledore's office was not what Harry had expected. It was stranger and more alive. Delicate silver instruments whirred and puffed on spindle-legged tables. Shelves climbed the circular walls in book-lined arcs. Portraits of sleeping headmasters and headmistresses hung in gilt frames, some snoring faintly, some pretending to sleep while watching through slitted eyes. A magnificent scarlet bird sat upon a perch behind the desk, plumage glowing like banked fire. The room smelled of parchment, old stone, wax, and something sweet Harry could not place until Dumbledore offered a dish and said, "Sherbet lemon?" Harry took one because refusal seemed somehow as risky as acceptance. Dumbledore, seated behind the desk, looked less theatrical here than he did in the Great Hall, less like an emblem and more like a man whose rooms had gradually filled with the evidence of a long life. He wore midnight blue robes embroidered at the cuffs with tiny silver constellations. His spectacles caught the candlelight. "You are wondering," he said, "whether you are in trouble." Harry, who had been wondering exactly that, went red. "A sensible question," Dumbledore added, smiling. "Fortunately, you are not." Harry released a breath so abruptly he nearly laughed. Dumbledore let the relief settle before he continued. "I invited you because during the last several weeks, you have demonstrated 3 qualities that rarely arrive together in so young a wizard. Courage, certainly. A tendency toward mischief, yes, though we shall leave that to one side. More importantly, you have shown quickness under pressure." Gun, guy, zire. Harry was not sure how to answer that. Praise, in his experience, often concealed a trick. Dumbledore seemed to know. "You need not defend yourself from a compliment here." The words landed with such gentle accuracy that Harry could only stare. "There are," Dumbledore said, folding his hands, "certain disciplines not generally taught to first years. For very good reasons. Children ought, whenever possible, to be allowed the luxury of learning in safety before they learn in earnest how the world may threaten them." He rose and moved around the desk, walking with a smoothness that belied his age. He stopped beside a cabinet, opened it, and drew out 2 practice wands and a narrow, leather-bound notebook. "However," he went on, "the world is not always polite enough to wait until our education is complete." Harry's scar tingled. "Because of me?" "Because danger has already shown an interest in you." Dumbledore's voice did not sharpen, but it gained weight. "I would rather you never need what I propose to teach you. I would rather still that you possess it if need arrives anyway." There was no grand speech in Harry to meet this, only a sudden, fierce attention. No adult had ever said to him, in so many words, that his vulnerability was worth preparing against. "What would you teach me?" he asked. "Control first, then observation, then a few forms of defense. Nothing extravagant, nothing you are not capable of bearing. Will anyone know?" Dumbledore's eyes twinkled, but not with frivolity. "I think it best if these lessons remain private for now. Privacy is not the same as shame, Harry. Often it is merely a way of allowing a thing to grow properly before the world begins advising it." Harry nodded. He did not entirely understand, but he liked the seriousness of it. Dumbledore handed him a practice wand. "Show me how you hold yours." Harry drew his own wand and took the stance he had seen other students adopt in Flitwick's class. Dumbledore said nothing for a moment. Then he stepped closer, and with the ease of long habit, adjusted Harry's elbow, shifted his feet half an inch, and pressed lightly between his shoulder blades. "Magic follows intention," he said. "But intention travels through the body. A frightened stance creates frightened casting. A rigid stance breaks under pressure. You do not stand to display confidence. You stand so that confidence has somewhere to go." The lesson began there. For half an hour Harry did not cast a single spell. He learned instead how to plant his feet, how to turn without tangling his own balance, how to keep the line of his wand clear, how to breathe on the draw-in rather than the release so his arm did not shake. Dumbledore had him close his eyes and identify sounds in the room. The ticking of a brass device, the rustle of a portrait sleeve, the soft shift of Fawkes on his perch. Then he opened a window 2 inches and asked Harry what had changed. "The air," Harry said. "And something outside. Rain." He listened harder. "An owl." Dumbledore's smile deepened. "Good." Only after that did he begin with magic. He conjured 3 floating beads no bigger than marbles, and set them glimmering in a line before Harry. "You will not strike them," he said. "You will not show them how clever you can be. You will move them together, stop them together, and lower them together. Again and again, until your wand hand and your mind have agreed to cooperate." Harry failed magnificently. The first bead shot upward and pinged against the ceiling. The second whipped into Dumbledore's beard, where it vanished with a spark that made Harry choke on horror. The third dropped like a stone and rolled under a table. Dumbledore retrieved it with a flick. An excellent beginning. Was it? No, said Dumbledore. But it was honest. Honest beginnings are rare and therefore precious. Harry laughed then, startled into it. The sound felt strange in the office and stranger still in himself. He returned the beads to the air. By the end of the lesson he could move them in something like a line, though not one any sane person would trust. Dumbledore assigned him a page of notes in the little notebook. Grip, breath, stance, listen before casting. At the bottom he wrote in large letters, "Clarity is swifter than panic." When Harry rose to leave, Dumbledore said, almost casually, "One more thing. These lessons are not for winning admiration. They are not for humiliating classmates. If ever they become that, they end." Harry met his gaze and understood that this was the real condition. "I know," he said. Dumbledore studied him as though weighing not the answer but the way it had been given. "Yes," he said softly. "I think you do." The lessons continued every week. Harry kept the secret with a protectiveness that surprised him. It was not that he mistrusted Ron or Hermione. It was that the hours in the office seemed to belong to a version of himself still too new to share. In the common room, he was still Harry who missed easy catches and exploding snap. Harry who groaned over essays. Harry who laughed at Fred and George and occasionally lost points. Upstairs, by the revolving staircase and the grinning gargoyle, he became someone required to pay attention with his whole body. Dumbledore made attention into a discipline. One week he charmed a paper swallowed a dart around the office and had Harry track it without turning his head. Another he set weak stinging jinxes into brass discs and made Harry deflect them with movement rather than magic. "Most harm can be avoided one heartbeat before it becomes necessary to stop," he said, tapping Harry's shin with the end of his wand until the boy corrected his footing. "Learn to respect that heartbeat." On the fourth lesson he introduced a disarming charm. "Expelliarmus," Dumbledore said, and the practice wand flew from Harry's hand so neatly that he scarcely felt it leave. It slapped into Dumbledore's palm. "A civilized spell," the old wizard remarked, "for those rare moments when civilization intrudes upon conflict." Harry spent the next 20 minutes overpronouncing the incantation and sending his own wand skittering across the carpet. By the end, he had managed to knock a dummy wand off a stand twice in succession. The second time, he whooped. Portraits applauded from the walls. Fawkes gave a sleepy trill. Harry left that lesson with his face hot and his mind blazing. The castle seemed altered after such evenings. Staircases ceased to be merely inconvenient and became lines of advantage. The shadows between suits of armor became cover. He found himself noting exits in classrooms, windows in corridors, the set of a professor's shoulder before a reprimand. He did not become grim. He became aware. For the first time in his life, awareness felt like power rather than burden. Halloween should have been easy. There were enchanted pumpkins in the great hall and bats in the rafters, and a feast large enough to make homesickness seem almost rude. Harry had gone to supper in high spirits. He had come from an afternoon lesson in which Dumbledore had made him repeat the disarming charm until his arm ached, and the office floor was littered with fallen practice wands like surrender flags. Again, the headmaster had said, not unkindly. Each time Harry grinned too early. "Success is a poor teacher if you invite it to leave after one visit." Then Ron, flushed by the ordinary carelessness of boys and the relief of being funny among friends, said something thoughtless about Hermione Granger's manner and her lack of people skills. Hermione, who had probably been practicing levitation in her head while listening to everyone else mangle it, fled before any apology could become possible. Harry noticed she was not at the feast only when Professor Quirrell burst in, smelling of garlic and panic, to announce that a troll had entered the dungeons. The hall erupted. Harry was halfway to the floor with the rest before it struck him that Hermione, mortified and crying, might never have heard the warning. He looked at Ron. Ron looked at him. Between one breath and the next, they were moving the wrong way through the chaos. The girls' bathroom door was off its hinges. Water covered the floor in rippling sheets. Broken porcelain littered the room. The troll, larger and filthier up close than Nightmare had prepared Harry to expect, loomed among shattered stalls with its club dragging gouges in the stone. Hermione was pressed against the far wall, wand in hand, eyes huge behind her hair. Later, Harry would remember that his first sensation was not fear. It was scale. Dumbledore's office was full of small, precise hazards, beads, discs, darting paper creatures. This thing was not small, not precise, not civilized. It stank of old rot and brute force. It made the room too tiny. The troll bellowed and swung. "Hermione, down!" Harry shouted. She dropped on instinct. The club smashed a sink into bright ruin. Shards sprayed the walls. Water exploded over Harry's shoes. He moved before thought fully formed. Dumbledore's voice, calm as lit candlewick, came back to him from a dozen lessons. Most harm can be avoided one heartbeat before it becomes necessary to stop. Harry darted left, not toward Hermione but toward the troll's peripheral vision, making himself noisy. "Oi, pea-brain!" he yelled, grabbing the nearest broken tap and hurling it. The metal struck the creature's ear with a ring like a cracked bell. The troll turned. That heartbeat was enough for Ron to skid around behind it. Harry knew, even as he ran, that he could not overpower such a beast with anything he knew. He was not trying to win. He was trying to buy confusion. Another lesson came back. A fight is often decided by who understands the objective first. The troll charged him with awful speed for something so massive. Harry slipped in the water, righted himself, and felt the club pass so near his shoulder that the air of it struck him. He rolled, came up, and saw Hermione dragging herself away through the flooded tiles. Good. Good. Wingardium Leviosa, Ron bellowed. The words cracked with more desperation than grace, but desperation can be a form of faith. The club wrenched upward from the troll's grip, hovered wildly, then came down on its owner's skull with a thud so final the whole room seemed to hold its breath. The troll collapsed. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then Harry realized he was standing in an inch of water, shaking hard enough to see it in the reflection. McGonagall arrived first, white with fury. Snape appeared behind her and Quirrell beyond him, looking faint enough to collapse again if required. Hermione, in an act of courage perhaps greater than facing the troll, lied for them at once. She said she had gone looking for it and Harry and Ron had followed to save her. McGonagall docked points and gave them back in the same speech. Snape's eyes lingered on Harry's wet sleeves and muddy knees with an unreadable darkness. Dumbledore said nothing at all. That frightened Harry more than the shouting. He was summoned the next evening. "I was stupid," Harry said the moment the office door shut behind him. Dumbledore, who was arranging 3 brass discs in the air above his desk, glanced over his spectacles. "Certainly. Most acts of bravery look like stupidity from at least one angle. Sit down." Harry sat, bewildered. "I have already spoken with Professor McGonagall," Dumbledore continued. "You are not here for punishment. You are here because yesterday offered you an important lesson, and I have no intention of wasting it." He turned a disc with his wand. A faint sting charms shimmered across its surface. "What was your objective?" "To get Hermione out." Good. Good. "Not to defeat the troll?" "No." Harry thought about the bathroom, the size of the club, the shock of seeing Hermione alive when the sink exploded beside her. "No." "Excellent." Dumbledore's expression warmed, though only a little. Many older wizards would have answered that question badly, and if you had tried to defeat it, we'd have died. Probably. There was no cruelty in the word, only fact. Dumbledore stepped away from the desk. "You did something else correctly. You moved to its flank, not because you understood the anatomy of trolls, but because you understood movement under pressure. That may have saved you. It will not save you forever." I know. Harry swallowed. "So I was lucky." "Harry," said Dumbledore very gently, "luck is only useful to those who remain alive long enough to enjoy it." The lesson that night was harsher than those before it. Dumbledore sent the brass discs at Harry in irregular patterns, each carrying a small jolt. Harry had to evade some and deflect others with a hastily muttered charm. His wand arm burned. Sweat ran into his collar. Twice he was hit hard enough to yelp. Each time Dumbledore made him reset his stance before speaking. "Fear narrows you," he said. "Pain narrows you. Surprise narrows you. The world, when violent, will do its very best to make you small. Your task is not to feel nothing. Your task is to remain large enough inside yourself to choose." At the end, Harry could barely hold the wand straight. Dumbledore handed him a goblet of water. Their fingers brushed. "You did well," he said. Harry, panting, looked up sharply. "You said I was stupid. I also said you were brave. The difficulty, as you will discover, is that the two often travel together." Dumbledore's mouth twitched. "I am trying to teach you to invite only one of them." That became the pattern of the weeks that followed. The lessons changed because Harry had changed. Dumbledore began showing him not just how to stand, but how to recover when stands failed. He taught him the logic of retreat, the dignity of survival, the advantage of disarming over hurting when either would do. Sometimes he told stories, not heroic ones, never those, but stories of mistakes made in duels, of men who had believed power made them invulnerable and discovered too late that arrogance is simply a blindfold one ties oneself. Harry did not realize until much later that Dumbledore was telling him, in fragments too careful to be confessional, the shape of his own remorse. Ron noticed that Harry moved differently now, a little less haphazardly, especially with a broom in hand or a wand. "You've been practicing," he accused one night as Harry snatched a falling goblet before it hit the floor. "A bit," Harry said. Hermione narrowed her eyes. "Practicing what?" Harry shrugged with more innocence than skill. He hated deceiving them. Yet the secrecy had become part of the thing itself. Dumbledore's lessons were not only about magic. They were the first promise Harry had been given that he might be worth the trouble of preparing. He guarded that promise like a flame in bad weather. By November, Quidditch had become both pleasure and discipline. Flying for Gryffindor placed Harry in a kind of public danger, very unlike the private dangers Dumbledore rehearsed in the office. There were cheers, expectations, the hot animal joy of speed, the clean violence of weather. On a broom he felt not armored but vivid. The pitch was not a battlefield. It was a place where instinct, sharpened and directed, might become something beautiful. Then, in the match against Slytherin, his broom tried to throw him to his death. One moment he was circling high, eyes scanning for the flash of gold that would end the game. The next, the handle jerked beneath him like a living thing seized by rage. The world tilted. His hands, cold suddenly as stone, locked around the shaft. Wind clawed at his robes. Below, faces turned upward and split into panic. He did not scream. Part of it was shock. Part of it was pride. But deeper than either was the echo of Dumbledore in his ear. "Panic is a second enemy. Refuse it room." Harry flattened himself against the broom to lower his center of gravity. He shifted his grip, not to fight the motion head-on, but to move with the bucking enough to keep from being thrown. The broom spun. The stands became sky, turf, sky, turf, a green and gray blur. He tasted blood where he bit his tongue. Down below, Hermione Granger was on her feet, shoving through spectators with such singular purpose that Ron could barely keep up. Snape, at the edge of the stands, was muttering something under his breath. Black eyes fixed not on Harry alone, but on the movement around him. Quirrell sat a row behind, his stammering mouth hidden by a crowd. Hermione, convinced by appearances and loyalty, knocked into Snape and set his robes on fire. The broom steadied. Harry forced it downward in a ragged dive, hit the earth hard enough to jar every bone in his body, then coughed up the snitch into his hand as if his stomach had been preserving it for dramatic effect. Gryffindor roared. Wood shouted himself hoarse with relieved triumph. Ron pounded Harry's back. Hermione, wild-eyed and ash-smudged, announced that Snape had been jinxing the broom and she had stopped him. Harry said nothing at first. Training had changed him in at least one uncomfortable way. He trusted first impressions less now than before. Snape had been staring, yes, but with an intensity that did not feel predatory in retrospect. Protective even. The idea was intolerable, which did not make it impossible. Dumbledore confirmed none of it when Harry raised the matter at his next lesson. Magic leaves traces in perception before it leaves them in understanding, he said instead, and darkened the room with a tap of his wand. In the gloom, he conjured 5 threads of light, red, blue, gold, silver, green, and made them circle Harry's head at varying distances. Close your eyes. Tell me which one means to strike. Harry laughed once, certain this was impossible, then obeyed. At first there was nothing but embarrassment and the smell of candle wax. Then, slowly, he began to distinguish pressure from brightness. One thread felt cool and indifferent. Another felt warm and curious. A third came at him with the sharp little malice of a pin. He flinched before it touched and pointed. Dumbledore's voice, pleased and grave, came from the dark. Again. Christmas fell on Hogwarts like a benediction. Snow deepened the grounds. The corridors glowed with evergreen and candlelight. The Weasley twins enchanted suits of armor to sing carols badly enough to offend history. Harry stayed at school with the feeling of a man unexpectedly reprieved from exile. He received gifts, sweets, a knitted jumper, a 50-pence piece from the Dursleys that seemed almost more insulting than nothing, and one anonymous parcel containing a cloak fine as water and cold as moonlight. His father's cloak, though Harry did not know it yet. It was under that cloak, moving through the sleeping castle with his pulse bright in his throat, that Harry found the mirror. The room was old and hidden, and full of dust. Moonlight lay across the floorboards. The mirror rose from the shadows in a gold frame carved with words he could not read. At first he thought the reflection delayed. Then he saw that the people gathered behind him were not in the room at all. His father was untidy and handsome, with black hair that refused authority. His mother stood beside him, one hand lifted as though she could almost touch Harry's shoulder through the glass. Her eyes were his own eyes, only gentler, because they had not yet belonged to a child who had needed watchfulness to survive. There were others beyond them, ranks and layers of faces, all smiling with a kind of grave joy. Harry stared until his sight blurred. He stepped closer. The reflection stepped closer. No sound, no touch, only the unbearable fact of them. He came back the next night and the night after. By the third visit he had begun to dread the moment of turning away before he had even knelt to pull off the cloak. He could feel the mirror changing the shape of time. It made hours thin and minutes devouring. It made the present feel like a badly lit anteroom outside the only place that mattered. You are very like your father when you frown. Harry whirled. Dumbledore sat on the window seat as though he had always been there, robes silvered by moonlight. He was not smiling. Harry's throat closed. Sir, I wasn't stealing. No, said Dumbledore. You were searching. He rose and came to stand beside Harry before the mirror. Together they looked into it. Harry saw James and Lily as before. He wanted, with sudden childish desperation, to ask what Dumbledore saw. To demand it almost, because standing here together made the old man's secrets feel unfair. What is it? Harry whispered. The Mirror of Erised, Dumbledore said. It shows us neither truth nor falsehood exactly, but the deepest desire of our hearts. This has made it a source of wonder for some and ruin for more. Harry could not stop looking. His mother's smile seemed on the verge of movement. I see them. Yes. The word was so gentle that Harry's chest ached. Can it bring them back? No? Harry closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Lily was still smiling and still unreachable. Dumbledore's voice changed then, becoming the tone Harry knew from lessons, not because it lost kindness, but because it admitted necessity. Desire is not an enemy, he said, but it is a door through which enemies may enter. A wizard who cannot tell longing from instruction may be led by any hand cruel enough to promise him what he misses. Not me. Harry swallowed hard. He knew dimly that this was still a lesson, perhaps the hardest one yet. You knew I was coming here. I suspected. Dumbledore's gaze remained on the mirror. A hidden room, an heirloom cloak, a boy who has spent his life being denied explanation. The odds were poor against you. That won a breath of laughter from Harry despite everything. What do you see? Harry asked. Dumbledore's mouth softened. A pair of thick woolen socks would not go amiss. Harry looked at him sideways, and because Dumbledore had taught him already to hear the small changes in breathing before a lie, and the chosen lightness of a voice that wished to step away from pain, he knew at once that the answer was not a true one. Dumbledore knew that Harry knew. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the old wizard said quietly, "Come here tomorrow night, and we shall practice leaving." Leaving proved worse than looking. Dumbledore made Harry stand before the mirror until the first savage rush of wanting had risen and nearly broken him. Then he had to step back on command. Again. 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 Each time the distance felt like tearing. Each time Dumbledore made him breathe, square his shoulders, and name 5 things in the room that were not the mirror. Candle, window, dust, stone, robe him. He had to return to the world by force of attention. When at last Harry succeeded without shaking, Dumbledore rested a hand briefly on the back of his neck. "Good," he said, and there was pride in it, but grief too. "Remember this feeling. One day what tempts you may not wear gold and family. It may wear righteousness, or revenge, or mercy in the wrong shape." Harry understood only part of that. The rest lodged in him anyway. The mirror was removed before the new term began. Harry missed it like an injury, which was proof enough that Dumbledore had been right. After that winter, Harry's lessons changed again. Dumbledore no longer had to persuade him that discipline mattered. He had seen what longing could do to the unguarded mind. He practiced harder. He listened more closely. He began, without meaning to understand that the greatest hazards in the world were not always the loudest. Spring should have brought ease. Instead, it sharpened suspicion. By then, Harry, Ron, and Hermione had discovered Nicholas Flamel by way of a chocolate frog card, a library hunt, and Hermione's superior refusal to let mystery remain unindexed. The package Hagrid had removed from Gringotts on the day Harry first entered the wizarding world had been the Philosopher's Stone. Flamel's Stone. A treasure that could make gold and brew the elixir of life. A treasure someone inside Hogwarts very much wanted. Everything after that became evidence. Snape's limp after his encounter with Fluffy. Quirrell's nervousness. Hagrid's accidental slips. The 3-headed dog itself, drooling atop a trapdoor on the 3rd-floor corridor. Harry found that Dumbledore's lessons made him both more useful and more difficult to satisfy. He no longer trusted mere suspicion, which meant he could not rest in it. He watched. He listened. He mapped the habits of professors without appearing to. He began to realize how much of school life took place beneath the surface of what students were meant to see. Yet even discipline could not prevent foolishness. Norbert the dragon hatched into their lives and immediately transformed them into accomplices. Hagrid adored the beast with the doomed tenderness of a man who had never met a dangerous creature he did not wish to mother. Harry and Hermione, lugging the dragon toward astronomy at midnight for Charlie Weasley's friends to collect, were caught in the act. Draco Malfoy, who had tried to profit by spying and ended up ensnared in the same punishment, received detention alongside them. Neville, dragged into misfortune by nothing stronger than loyalty, came too. Thus Harry entered the Forbidden Forest at night. Hagrid had a lantern in one hand and a crossbow in the other. Fang pressed against his leg with canine uncertainty. The trees crowded close as though listening. Moonlight entered in torn strips. Somewhere overhead, unseen things moved through the branches with soft, dry sounds. They were looking for whatever had been injuring unicorns. "You'll be fine," Hagrid said, which was the sort of assurance that guarantees the opposite. The forest smelled of wet bark and old leaves and hidden teeth. Harry kept his wand out, not because he believed it could save him from everything in the dark, but because Dumbledore had trained him out of the fatal habit of leaving tools inaccessible until panic required them. Draco affected disdain until something rustled close by and then walked near enough to Harry to betray the truth of his fear. Neville's teeth clicked audibly. They found silver blood first. It lay on the black earth like spilled moonlight, luminous and wrong. Even Hagrid went quiet at the sight of it. They split into pairs after that, and Harry, with Draco and Fang, moved deeper under the trees where mist gathered low. His scar began to prickle. He stopped at once. Draco nearly walked into him. "What now?" Draco hissed, attempting scorn and landing on Tremor. "Nothing," Harry whispered, though his skin said otherwise. The pain was not the clean, sharp warning Snape had provoked at the feast. It was a pressure from within, like a nail being slowly pressed through old wood. Then he saw the clearing. The unicorn lay on its side among the roots, more beautiful dead than many living things ever managed to be alive. Its mane spilled pale over the leaves. Silver blood pooled under its neck. Kneeling beside it was a hooded figure, thin and crooked and terrible in the intimacy of its hunger. Its head bent to the wound. It drank. Harry did not move. Every lesson Dumbledore had given him seemed at once present and useless. He knew how to breathe. He knew how to plant his feet. He knew the line of a disarming charm, the timing of a dodge, the dignity of retreat. None of that mattered to the horror of seeing a human shape feed on innocence like an animal reduced by malice to appetite alone. The hooded figure lifted its head. The face was hidden, but the attention in it struck Harry like a blow. His scar erupted in agony. He cried out and dropped to one knee, hand clamped to his forehead, vision whitening at the edges. Something moved toward him through the silver dark clearing. Fang yelped and bolted. Draco's breath became a ragged scream. Harry tried to raise his wand, tried to remember any incantation at all, but the pain annihilated sequence, thought, dignity. There was only a monstrous nearness, and the animal's certainty that whatever approached had known him once in a room full of death. A thunder of hooves split the clearing. The centaur struck the hooded figure aside with the force of a battering ram. The thing recoiled, cloaked body twisting, then fled between the trees with a speed at odds with its weakness. The centaur reared over Harry, white hair flying, eyes like pale fire. "Are you hurt?" Harry could not answer at once. Sweat chilled his back. The pain in his scar receded by degrees, leaving nausea behind like a tide line. Draco had vanished entirely. Sensible, Harry thought dimly. The centaur bent his forelegs. "Get up. Quickly. This place is no longer safe for you." Harry got up because the alternative was remaining in the clearing where the unicorn bled. The centaur, who named himself Firenze, carried him partway back through the forest while speaking in a voice that was grave and oddly remote, as if some part of him conversed more often with stars than with earthly things. "To slay a unicorn," Firenze said, "is to commit a monstrous act. To drink its blood is to preserve yourself with a cursed half-life, a life paid for by what should never have been taken." Harry's stomach turned. "Who was it?" he asked. Firenze's gaze shifted through the branches overhead. One desperate for continuance. Hagrid found them in a crashing tangle of relief and worry. Back at the edge of the grounds, with Draco blustering over his fright and Neville nearly in tears from having imagined Harry devoured, the forest became once more merely dark trees and damp soil. Yet Harry carried the clearing with him like a burn. Dumbledore saw it the instant Harry entered the office the next evening. "You met something in the forest," he said. Harry nodded. Words came badly. He described the blood, the hooded figure, the pain. He did not dramatize. He did not need to. Dumbledore listened without interruption. The lines around his mouth deepened. When Harry finished, silence sat between them for several moments. "Was it Voldemort?" Harry asked at last, the name rough but intact on his tongue. Dumbledore's fingers tightened once upon the arm of his chair. "Something of him," he said, "or something bound to his need." Harry stared at the floor. I froze. "No." Dumbledore's voice was immediate. "You were struck by pain linked to trauma and dark magic. That is not the same thing. Main. Goodbye. I couldn't do anything. That," Dumbledore said, quieter now, "is different, and useful to know." Harry looked up, anger flaring through shame. "Useful? To you?" said Dumbledore, and the words steadied the room. "There is no dignity in pretending limits away. Better to discover them while surviving than assume they do not exist and die of the assumption." Harry breathed hard through his nose. Dumbledore rose, came around the desk, and stood before him. "Listen to me very carefully. There may come moments when courage feels like action and wisdom feels like paralysis. Do not confuse them. There are enemies for which retreat is not cowardice but strategy. There are others for which survival itself is victory enough. Nay." Harry heard the care in it then, and with it something harsher beneath. Fear, not for himself but for Harry. It altered him more than the words. "What if I can't tell which is which?" he asked. Dumbledore's expression became unbearably kind. "Then you will choose as well as you can and live to learn from it. That is all any of us have ever done." "Nay. Nah." The next lesson was not magical at all. Dumbledore set Harry in a chair, dimmed the lights, and taught him how to return from fear. Name the room. Count the breaths. Find the edges of the desk with your fingers. Recall the last safe place. Anchor the mind. Harry did it clumsily, and then better. By the end, his pulse had slowed. Only then did Dumbledore place a wand in his hand. They practiced the disarming charm until midnight. After the forest, Harry no longer entertained the childish hope that the danger at Hogwarts might be somebody's misunderstanding. Something hunted life. Something wanted the stone. Something at the school was serving it or being used by it. The knowledge hardened all the bright edges of term. Even exam preparation, which ought to have been misery enough on its own, took on the feeling of a crowded anteroom before calamity. Hermione revised with the fervor of a saint defending doctrine. Ron revised as one facing an enemy too numerous to count. Harry revised because he had learned from Dumbledore, if nowhere else, that discipline in one field often fortifies another. Yet behind the diagrams of mooncalf behavior and the properties of forgetfulness potions ran a second education altogether. Dumbledore's office became a workshop of contingency. One evening the headmaster filled the room with tiny winged keys, moving at erratic speeds, and told Harry to track the one whose wing beat was fractionally uneven. "Not every challenge rewards force," he said as Harry lunged, missed, corrected himself, and finally snatched the right key from the air. Some reward patience disguised as speed. Another night he conjured a soft, translucent barrier in front of Harry's wand, and had him press magic into it until the surface hummed. "Protection," Dumbledore said, "is not always a wall. Often it is a refusal, a statement your magic makes about what may not pass." Harry's attempts collapsed more often than they held, but once, only once at first, the barrier remained long enough to turn aside a stinging bead. The success thrilled him out of proportion to its modesty. "There," Dumbledore said. "Remember how that felt. Not anger, not panic. Permission denied." Harry grinned despite himself. Dumbledore's answering look was almost wistful. "It is nice to teach a child who still thinks progress is delightful." Harry, flushed, said, "Do adults not?" "Only the cleverest ones. Not all the lessons were spells." Dumbledore began to ask questions that seemed at first to belong more to chess than to magic. "If you must choose between seizing an object and preserving an ally, which matters?" "The ally, even if losing the object endangers many?" Harry hesitated. Dumbledore waited. The waiting itself was instruction. "It depends on the ally," Harry said at last. "And the object." Dumbledore's eyes shone. "Excellent. Rules that survive reality are rare." Harry laughed. That isn't an answer. No, it is better. Answers are small. Judgment must be roomy. Meanwhile, outside the office, ordinary school life continued to shed clues. Hagrid, over tea one evening. Let's slip that music put Fluffy to sleep. He realized his mistake only after Hermione, too casually by half, asked where anyone might learn such a useful thing. His great bearded face arranged itself into alarm and betrayal. Shouldn't have said that, he muttered. Shouldn't have said that at all. Harry walked back to the castle with the knowledge thudding in his mind. Whoever went after the stone would need that information. Then came the note from the Ministry. Dumbledore was summoned to London on urgent business, or so the message said. Harry learned of it by accident, overhearing Professor McGonagall in a corridor. The certainty hit him not as suspicion now, but as pattern completed. The fake message, the timing, the hidden stone, Hagrid's slip, Quirrell's nerves, Snape's looming presence around every rumor. Someone was moving tonight. Harry ran to find Ron and Hermione. They gathered in an empty classroom that smelled of chalk and rain. Hermione's hands shook only when still, so she kept them busy packing small items into her bag. Ron looked sick with excitement and terror. "We tell a teacher," Hermione said. "We did," Harry said. "McGonagall won't listen. She thinks it's all under control." "Maybe it is," Hermione snapped, though her face said she knew the weakness of the phrase. Harry heard Dumbledore in his memory. A fight is often decided by who understands the objective first. "The objective isn't catching whoever it is," he said, pacing. "It's stopping them getting the stone." Ron stared. "You sound like—" He stopped. Harry stopped too, aware that something in his voice had changed enough for his friend to hear it. "Like what?" Harry asked. Ron shrugged, awkward and honest. "Like somebody older." The words ought to have pleased him. Instead, they struck oddly. Older was not always a kindness. Yet there was no time to unpack it. Hermione drew herself up. "Then we go after the stone." She said it in the tone of someone passing a law against her own better judgment. Harry looked at them both and felt, very sharply, what Dumbledore had been trying to teach him all term. Ability means little if it isolates you from the people whose gifts differ from yours. Ron saw structure where Harry saw momentum. Hermione saw solutions where others saw difficulty. If they went, they must go as themselves, not as followers. "Fluffy first," Harry said. "Music, then whatever the teachers put under the trapdoor. We don't know all of it, but we know some. And if there's a choice between one of us getting through and all of us being brave and stupid together, we choose getting through." Ron gave him a look. That sounded very Dumbledore. Harry nearly said "you have no idea," but checked himself in time. Before curfew, he received one last note. It appeared inside his notebook while he sat in the common room pretending to revise astronomical charts. He opened the pages and found, on paper that had been blank a moment before, a line in Dumbledore's hand. "Should you ever be forced to act in darkness, remember, do not duel for pride when you may move for time." There was no signature. Harry stared at the words until the ink dried. He did not know whether Dumbledore had meant them for tonight. He did not know whether the old man had guessed the trap and gone anyway, trusting or testing or both. He only knew that the note, appearing at that exact hour, felt less like permission than like a hand at his back. The castle quieted. Curfew fell. Rain began at the windows. Harry looked at Ron and Hermione across the common room and nodded once. They rose together. Night beneath Hogwarts had a different silence than night above it. Above, the castle slept in layers. Portraits dozing, torches guttering, students turning in bed. Ancient beams settling with old familiar sighs. Below, everything waited. The silence under the trapdoor was the silence of deliberate obstacles, of minds that had built tests and then gone away trusting them to keep watch. Fluffy slept to the last trembling notes of Hagrid's flute. The trapdoor yawned open under his paws. Harry dropped first because he would not ask the others to go where he had not, and because some reflex in him insisted that danger should meet him before it met his friends. He landed in Devil's Snare and only dimly remembered to keep still before the vines sensed his struggle. Hermione's voice, tight with panic but precise, cut through the dark. "Relax." Fire bloomed from her wand. The plant recoiled. They spilled free onto stone. Then keys. Hundreds of them. Metallic wings beating in mad loops beneath a vaulted ceiling. Harry's broommanship and Dumbledore's patience converged in that chamber. He did not chase at once. He listened. Wing beat, pattern, imperfection. There. The bent-winged key. He launched, snatched it from the air by fingertips and landed hard, grinning breathlessly as the others shouted. Then chess. The chamber beyond was cold enough to make breath visible. Stone pieces towered over them in ranks. Ron's face changed as he looked upon the board. Uncertainty dropped away. In its place came concentration so total it might have been possession. Harry had seen that look only once before, on Dumbledore's face when a lesson became more than practice. "Harry, you take Bishop. Hermione, you're beside him. I'll be Knight." He directed the match with frightening calm, and Harry obeyed because the difference between control and trust is often smaller than pride admits. Pieces smashed each other into gravel. Echoes rang like war. Harry moved where Ron told him. So did Hermione. Gradually, the logic of it emerged. Ron was not merely playing. He was spending them toward an ending. When realization hit, it hit Harry too late to stop. "No? That's chess," Ron said, white-faced and steady. "You've got to go on." The Black Queen's stone arm struck him down. For half a heartbeat, Harry nearly ruined everything by running to Ron. Dumbledore's questions in the office returned with merciless clarity. Object or ally? Mission or heart? The point had never been to make choosing painless. Only possible. Hermione knelt once by Ron, checked his breathing, and stood with tears, bright but unshed. "We go," she said, sounding older than either boy had a right to hear. The potions riddle took her and left Harry alone at last. He entered the final chamber expecting Snape. Quirrell stood before the Mirror of Erised. The room was lit by torches reflected 1,000 times in the mirror's gold frame. Quirrell's back was to Harry, shoulders narrow in his purple turban and traveling cloak. He did not turn at once. When he did, the habitual stammer seemed to have been left in another room altogether. "Ah, Harry," he said. "You've come." The voice was soft, almost tender and more frightening for it. Harry's wand was in his hand before the last word ended. "Where's Snape?" Quirrell smiled. "Severus does have a gift for drawing attention. It has been most useful." Every suspicion Harry had laid upon Snape shattered in one instant and rearranged around the trembling man before him. Harry felt foolishness like a physical bruise. He felt, too, the cold advantage of understanding finally arrived. Duel for pride or move for time? Quirrell turned back to the mirror. "I wondered whether you might reach this far. You have been troublesome all year. More troublesome than a first year should know how to be." Harry did not answer. He was studying distance. Wand hand, exits, the mirror itself. Quirrell had not attacked yet. That meant he needed something. "The stone," Harry said. "Yes." Quirrell's reflection moved oddly in the glass, as though another intention lurked inside the same body. Harry felt a whisper of scar pain and knew, before the revelation came, what waited behind it. "See what I see, boy," said a thin voice from nowhere and everywhere. "Tell me what the mirror shows." Quirrell's hands rose to his turban. They shook. He unwound the cloth and turned. Where the back of a man's head should have been was a face, flat and waxen. Eyes red in the torchlight, nostrils like slits in a skull, not finished deciding between life and death. The mouth smiled. Harry had imagined nightmares. Reality proved worse by being intimate. This was not a distant monster in a story. It was wickedness clinging to flesh because it had not yet strength enough for its own. His scar burst into pain, but he had learned, if not mastery, then stubbornness against it. "Tell the truth," said the face. "What do you see?" Harry looked into the mirror. He saw himself, pale and trembling, and in the reflection his own hand slipped into his pocket and withdrew a blood-red stone. At once he felt a physical weight settle in his actual pocket. He did not react. Mirror lesson, he thought wildly. Don't react. I see myself, he said, making his voice steadier than his pulse, shaking hands with Dumbledore. I've won the House Cup for Gryffindor. Quirrell hissed in frustration. Voldemort's eyes burned. He lies. Let me speak to him face to face, the thin voice whispered. Quirrell advanced. Harry moved first. Expelliarmus! The disarming charm struck Quirrell's wand hand and sent his wand spinning. For a glorious half-second, Harry saw true shock on the man's face. Then Quirrell lunged with animal speed rather than magical skill, and Harry, too committed to the success of his spell, nearly lost the advantage at once. He dove sideways. Quirrell's fingers grazed his sleeve. The cloth smoked. Harry slammed into the mirror base, rolled, came up on one knee, and snatched at Quirrell's fallen wand. Quirrell kicked it across the floor. The older wizard's face had become contorted, not with stammering weakness, but with rage long rehearsed in secret. So, Quirrell said, breathing hard, he has taught you. The realization in the words chilled Harry more than the attack. Dumbledore had hidden the lessons well. Quirrell had guessed anyway. He cast Wandless then, a rope of dark force striking from his hand. Harry threw up the half-formed shield Dumbledore had drilled into him. It held for a heartbeat, no more, enough to deflect the worst of it into sparks that bit his cheek instead of his throat. Pain flared. Harry ran, Dochi. The chamber became movement. He circled the mirror to keep it between them. Quirrell pursued with a predator's patience now, perhaps under orders from the thing riding him. Harry knew he could not win a duel here. Not truly. His spells were few, his power young, his enemy desperate and possessed by a terror from whom grown wizards recoil. But movement for time had a grammar of its own, and Harry had studied it. He darted close, then away. He used the mirror's frame as cover, ducking under curses that scorched gold. He feinted for Quirrell's wand, forcing the man to guard low. He tried again with Expelliarmus, and this time knocked Quirrell's recovered wand askew, sending the curse harmlessly into the ceiling. "Seize him!" Voldemort shrieked. Quirrell obeyed. His hands closed around Harry's wrist. What followed was not magic, Harry knew by incantation. It was older, fiercer, woven into him by a woman who had stood between murder and her child, and made of love a law. Quirrell screamed. Blisters erupted under his fingers where they touched Harry's skin. Smoke rose. Harry cried out too, not from the same agony but from the violence of the contact and the scar tearing at him, as if the two magics recognized each other and could not exist in peace. Some buried instinct, half terror and half understanding, told him what to do. He clutched back. Quirrell shrieked again, a high sound of disbelief and mortal pain. Skin blackened beneath Harry's grip. The smell was sickening. Voldemort's face on the back of Quirrell's head contorted with hatred so pure it stripped all grandeur from him. He was suddenly only what he had always been at core, a man who could not bear the existence of what he could not dominate. Harry held on, not because he was brave, because every lesson, every fear, every loss, every hour in the office under Dumbledore's patient eye, had led him to this one impossible fact. He could not outspell this evil, but he might survive it long enough for the evil to destroy itself upon what it had failed to understand. Quirrell threw him off. Harry hit the floor and the room reeled. The stone in his pocket dug against his hip. Torchlight ran in molten lines. He heard Voldemort screaming commands, heard Quirrell sobbing, heard his own heartbeat slamming at his ears. Then there was a rushing sound, like wind in a chimney, or 1,000 cloaks turning at once. A shape of darkness detached itself from Quirrell in a furious surge, and passed through Harry like ice made of knives. He had one instant to think he was dying. Then blackness took him. Pain woke him gently, which was almost insulting after the violence of how he had earned it. Harry opened his eyes to white curtains, white counterpanes, and the clean medicinal smell of the hospital wing. Sunlight rested across the bed in warm stripes. For several seconds he could not remember why he felt both exhausted and strangely empty, as if some monstrous pressure had finally lifted from the air and left him lighter by its absence. Then the memory returned. Mirror, Quirrell, screaming hands, the face. He jerked upright. "Lie back at once," said Madame Pomfrey. Her voice had enough command in it to make even panic pause. Harry obeyed on instinct. Beyond her shoulder, seated in a chair too small to flatter his height, was Dumbledore. Relief hit Harry so sharply he almost laughed at it. "Good morning," said the headmaster. The shadows beneath his eyes were darker than Harry had ever seen them. "Or perhaps good afternoon. Time has been behaving imprecisely around you." Harry's mouth was dry. Is Ron all right? Hermione? The stone?" "In order." No. Yes, and no." Harry stared. Dumbledore's beard twitched. "You did not die. Ron Weasley will recover from his encounter with transfigured masonry, and will doubtless speak of it for years. Miss Granger is well, though she has worn a track in the floor between here and the library. The stone is safe no longer because it has been destroyed." "Nenda, it's fun to be." Harry blinked. "Destroyed?" "Nicholas and Perenelle Flamel have had, I think, enough of immortality," they agreed with admirable grace. Dumbledore's gaze rested on him. It seemed prudent. Harry lay back against the pillows and let this rearrange the room. After a moment he said, "Quirrell." Dumbledore's expression turned still. "Dead." The words settled softly and with complete finality. Harry had known, perhaps, that Quirrell could not have survived what he had become. Yet knowing and hearing are different acts. Harry looked down at his hands. The skin was reddened but whole. "I killed him." Dumbledore was silent long enough that Harry looked up. "You were attacked by a man who had already surrendered himself to a fate little better than death," the old wizard said at last. "Your mother's protection did what it was meant to do. It made it unbearable for him to harm you. What followed belongs not to the category of murder but of consequences." Harry did not feel entirely comforted by that, but he heard the care with which the answer had been made. "And Voldemort?" "Not destroyed. Not yet." Dumbledore did not soften it. "But thwarted again, driven away from what remained of Quirrell. He is less than spirit now, and more dangerous for being desperate." There it was. Not reassurance, but truth scaled to what Harry could carry. He lay quiet, listening to the sounds of the wing. The clink of bottles, the rustle of Madame Pomfrey's skirts somewhere behind the curtains, a pigeon on the windowsill. Then, because the question had been waiting longer than all the others, he asked, "Did you know?" Dumbledore did not pretend not to understand. About Quirrell, not with certainty until too late. About danger? Yes. Harry's throat tightened. "Was that why you taught me?" The old man leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands folded. His face in that moment looked less like the headmaster's, and more like that of a very tired guardian who had spent too long calculating harms and choosing among them badly. "I began deciding to teach you," he said, "on the night I left you at Privet Drive." Harry forgot even to breathe. "I hoped," Dumbledore went on, eyes on the bedclothes, "that by the time such instruction became necessary, you would be much older. I hoped many things. Hope, while essential, is not strategy. You attracted danger in your first year. You met it with courage. Courage alone is a thin shield. I could not bear to let you go on offering it as though it were enough." The honesty of it hurt more than evasion might have. "You could have told me," Harry said. "Yes. There were 100 explanations available to a man like Dumbledore. Your age, your safety, your right to innocence, the complexity of old enmities, the burden of adult knowledge. He offered none. That omission made Harry trust him more, not less. Were the lessons for this? Harry asked quietly. For me to go after the stone? No. Dumbledore's answer was immediate. The lessons were for you. That they became useful here does not make you a tool, Harry, unless you choose to become one in your own mind. Me. The words struck deep because they named a fear Harry had not yet been able to articulate. All term he had cherished the secret lessons. All term a smaller and more frightened part of him had wondered why he had been chosen for them. Chosen can so easily mean used. Dumbledore seemed to read some flicker of that across his face. There are powers, he said softly, against which no training is sufficient. Your mother gave you one. I gave you another sort. Not greater, not purer, only different. Skill, awareness, a little steadiness. You are entitled to all of them. Duh. Harry turned that over. You can stop, Dumbledore said after a moment. The lessons, if you prefer, there will be no displeasure in me. Harry looked at the old man then and saw not manipulation but invitation. Real invitation. A choice. Perhaps the first profound one anyone had ever deliberately placed in his hands. He thought of the cupboard under the stairs, of the broom bucking beneath him, of the mirror in the forest and Quirrell's smoking hands, of the way Dumbledore had taught him not merely spells, but how to remain himself under fear. He thought, too, of Ron's loyalty and Hermione's mind, and how none of those gifts had become lesser because he had learned to sharpen his own. I don't want to stop, he said. Something eased in Dumbledore's face that he had perhaps not intended Harry to see. Very well, he said. Then next year we continue. More slowly if you wish, more wisely if I can manage it. Harry smiled despite the ache in him. You haven't been wise? Dumbledore's eyes twinkled at last, and there was the old danger and delight of him again. Intermittently, he admitted. It is one of my more charming faults. The end of term arrived like weather clearing after a siege. Harry received his visitors in batches. Ron came first, pale but ecstatic, recounting the chess match with alterations already enlarging his own heroism. Hermione came with a stack of books she did not mean to leave and cried exactly once when she thought Harry was asleep. Hagrid arrived carrying fudge he had made himself, which Madame Pomfrey confiscated at sight. McGonagall stood by the bed with stern approval and told Harry that any future attempts to save the school were to be better supervised. Snape did not come. Harry was oddly relieved. At the leaving feast, Dumbledore's point award still overturned the house cup in Gryffindor's favor, though when he looked at Harry there was more than celebratory mischief in his gaze. There was recognition, almost solemn in its warmth. The hall roared. Fred and George nearly crushed Harry in jubilant gratitude. Slytherin glowered. Draco Malfoy looked at Harry with something newly complicated, as if rivalry had discovered it was dealing not merely with luck, but with intention. On the train home, the world softened for a little while into sandwiches, fields, and the clatter of tracks. Harry did not tell Ron and Hermione everything. The secret lessons remained mostly secret, not out of shame but because he had not yet found the language for them. He admitted only that Dumbledore had been giving him extra help in defense, and that some of what he knew in the chamber had come from there. Hermione reacted with outrage at first and then envy. Ron simply stared. "Blimey," he said at last. "No wonder you've been impossible at exploding snap." Harry laughed until his side hurt. At King's Cross the ordinary world received them again with its blind eyes and hurried feet. Vernon Dursley's mustache bristled in disgust at the sight of owls, trunks, and joy. Petunia's mouth tightened when she saw how straight Harry stood. Dudley, sticky and spoiled in summer clothes, seemed suddenly less like a giant and more like a boy who had been allowed to mistake bulk for power. Harry followed them to the car with his trunk rattling behind him. Hidden beneath his school robes, wrapped in plain brown paper at the bottom of the trunk, lay a new notebook and a note in Dumbledore's hand. Continue with the exercises enclosed. 10 breaths before anger. 5 observations before action. 1 question always. What is the true objective? We begin again in September. There was no signature. None was needed. That night, in the smallest bedroom now grudgingly his, Harry sat on the edge of the bed and opened the notebook by torchlight under the blanket. The first pages contained diagrams of stance, short lines on focus, a list of books to request from the library when term began, and at the back a single sentence written larger than the rest. You are not being made into a weapon. You are being taught not to arrive defenseless. Harry read it twice. Outside, Privet Drive lay warm and smug in the dark, believing itself unchanged. But Harry knew better. The house was still a cage of sorts. The summer would still be mean in its small habitual ways. Vernon would shout. Petunia would watch. Dudley would sneer. None of that had been magicked away. Yet the boy who had returned was not the boy who had left. He set the notebook on his knees, planted his feet on the floorboards as Dumbledore had taught him, and breathed until the tightness in his chest loosened. Then he raised his wand, not to cast, only to feel its balance, its loyalty, the line from wrist to will, and lowered it again with deliberate care. Downstairs a door slammed. Someone called his name sharply. Harry closed the notebook, smiled without mirth and without fear, and rose. Somewhere beyond the suburban dark, a castle full of moving stairs and old portraits, and dangerous secrets waited for him to come back stronger. For the first time in his life, waiting did not feel like helplessness. It felt like preparation.